I just want you to see how much better Star Wars, or any story, can be when you show and don't tell. Okay, but what does that mean? You didn't explain what it means past me. You gave some examples, sure, but what, you just hate dialogue? It kind of seems like you hate dialogue. Listen, I don't hate dialogue. Telling doesn't mean dialogue. I don't even think it means exposition. But then what does it mean? Well, it's complicated. To start, let's look at the intro to the TV show Avatar, which is incredibly efficient. Even if you know nothing about this show, this intro tells you everything important about the story and setting. But doesn't this violate show don't tell? It's just Katara telling us stuff, right? Well, yes and no. It is pure exposition, but both the dialogue and the visuals are showing us stuff too.
Water. Earth. Fire. Air.
She lists each element while the visuals show us people manipulating those elements, so we can infer that's something people do in this setting. Then she says,
long ago, the 4 nations lived together in harmony,
which connects those elements to those nations, supported by visuals. She tells us why they no longer live in harmony.
Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
And the specific wording she uses communicates the suddenness of that attack. She introduces who the Avatar is.
Only the Avatar, master of all 4 elements, could stop them.
And we see him manipulating those elements to reinforce that that's something people can do because they haven't told us that explicitly. She doesn't say that Sokka is her brother. She just says,
my brother and I discovered the new Avatar,
with a picture of them on screen. We will pick up his name in context, but we might not know that they are siblings unless she tells us here. The first time she uses the word bending, it's to describe Aang as an airbender, which through context we can understand as being the name of people who do the manipulating of the elements. She tells us that he needs a lot of work before he's ready to save anyone, and the visuals show us that it's largely because of lack of maturity, not skill or talent. When she says,
but I believe Aang can save the world,
this tells us that she has faith in Aang, and this underlines the most crucial part of their relationship in the show, which is that Aang struggles to believe in himself, while Katara unfailingly believes in him. So is this intro telling or showing?
Okay, now I'm really confused.
Like, it's pure exposition, so that should be considered telling, but it shows us so much about the world and the characters beyond what's being told. And it's incredibly done. I wouldn't change a single thing about this intro. I think it might be perfect. This is why I don't really like using this phrase anymore. It's too easy for the advice to be misunderstood or applied too broadly or just poorly. Also, it can be kind of confusing. Show and tell are loose words and can sort of be used interchangeably. Both of these sentences work grammatically. When she says she believes he can save the world, this tells us that she has faith in Aang. And when she says she believes he can save the world, this shows us that she has faith in Aang. I still think the original meaning of show don't tell is useful, but I think it's usually better just to avoid the confusion. So instead, I prefer to think about it as storytelling efficiency. Because while I don't really know if this intro is telling or showing overall or whatever, I do know that it is extremely efficient. If you cut anything from it, you would understand less going in, and if you added anything, it would just be wasted craft. But when I say efficient, I don't just mean conveying the information in the shortest amount of time. It's more than that. It's about how the delivery can work to support the story. For example, this opening is a direct reference to Flash Gordon and sets the expectations of the audience in the right place. This is going to be a triumphant space opera about good and evil. The music, the word choice, even the capitalization support this. Look, it's going to be a return to a simpler time when the good guys are good, bad guys are bad, and good wins in the end. So when the bad guy maybe used to be good and ends up being good again, that became a really shocking twist. And most of the expectations that make that work are set right here. That's efficiency. But I want to stress that it's not about how much time you take. It's about what you do with the time you take. For example,
the world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air.
this intro is very slow. Galadriel stops and whispers every other sentence in Elvish. She also doesn't actually say anything about the backstory here. So is this inefficient? No. Just like Star Wars, this is setting up the style and genre of the story. Her slow, measured delivery about how the world has changed, combined with the slow, sad choir, mournful violin, and ethereal elvish whispers, show us that this is going to be a mythic story, which is the most important component of Tolkien's style. It also has the feel of an epitaph, of a story told in a lesser world that's fallen from its golden age, which is the second most important part of Tolkien's style that borrows heavily from the Christian mythos of a fallen, imperfect world. These two elements inform a lot of what's going on in the background of the story, and combined with the style and genre also inform a lot of what happens in the story. So they need to find an efficient way to communicate the style and hint at the backstory without slowing everything down to explain anything more than the necessities, and they did it excellently. And if we go back and look at the problems I had with the examples in the other video, they can also be explained by a lack of efficiency, as opposed to necessarily a problem with telling. It's not necessarily bad that Rey is doing a voiceover here. Technically, it's just a very long lead-in to the next scene. The real problem is that she's telling us things that have already been shown to us through the visuals, so it's an inefficient waste that detracts our attention from what the visuals are showing us, aside from the problem that it makes it seem like the movie doesn't expect us to be able to understand things unless they are explicitly told to us. Same thing with the other ones. Why is Luke telling us he's going to burn it? We can tell. Use this dialogue for something more. Why is Finn recapping the plot? We remember the plot. Use this dialogue for something more. I don't hate dialogue. I hate wasteful, inefficient dialogue. Get on with the story. Stop wasting my time.
Your hate has made you powerful. Now, fulfill your destiny. Take your father's place at my side.
Yes, the Emperor is telling us that Luke is mad and that he is currently powerful, and we can see that. But he's saying that one is being caused by the other, and using that causal link to push Luke into a specific story-critical action, and ups the stakes for when Luke refuses. It characterizes his worldview, and paves the way for Luke to solidify his. That's efficient. That's more than just telling us stuff. Luke's refusal is the same. It isn't just that he's refusing, but he's telling us why he's refusing. See how this connects back to the Avatar intro? It might be telling, it might be showing. Most of the time, it doesn't really matter. What matters is how much of the story you can pack into every single creative choice you make. When Avatar is on point, this kind of efficiency is everywhere. It's even used for jokes, which is another way you can be efficient with dialogue.
We could look for Jong Jong.
Yeah, right. Like we'll ever run into Jong Jong again.
Who's? Oh, never mind. If it's important, I'll find out.
They aren't just saying, this is why we aren't going to explain this to you. They are making a joke while doing that. Let's say a video you once threw together in like a week randomly became really popular, and maybe you mostly agree with the arguments in the video, but you don't think they are communicated super well and your thinking on it has evolved, so you decide to make a video critiquing that video. Do you start by explaining all that? No, just get to it. So let's use this new framework to critique my own critique of two parts of the early Mandalorian episodes. I said this scene was telling instead of showing, but I think we can actually break it out into two different but related problems. First, there is a serious lack of efficiency here. Nothing Mando says to the kid is information we actually need for the episode to function, and we're going to get it reiterated to us later anyway. Now, they could use this to communicate some growth or change in Mando's character, but the actual delivery doesn't reflect this. Growth and change are difficult and awkward, and this delivery is smooth and natural. This is especially tragic because we could have gotten so much drama out of him struggling with being a father instead of whatever they were trying to do with those middle episodes. The second but separate problem is that this is a departure from the style of the show. Remember how important it is to set certain stylistic expectations for your story? Well, they completely break those expectations here. This isn't necessarily wrong or bad if you have good reasons for doing so, but relating back to the efficiency problem, there's not enough here to justify the stylistic break. But a critique that I do think was a complete miss was saying that Mando's flashbacks could have the visuals cut, especially in the context of the last video. This is exactly the kind of misapplication of show don't tell I was talking about earlier. This scene is efficient. It also does an excellent job of setting up the themes of episodes 3, 7, and 8. What happened here is that I was really into Mando's minimalist, mysterious style, but that's a stylistic or aesthetic preference, not anything to do with the actual storytelling. However, this aesthetic preference can often be confused with what I think is the original meaning. I'm saying I think because we don't actually know what the original meaning is. If you Google around, you'll see a lot of different answers. A lot of them credit Chekhov, but this seems to be incorrect. Hemingway said something similar, but not quite it. Shockingly high in Google results, you'll also see people arguing that it's CIA propaganda or colonialism. There's also a Confucian parable that sounds a bit like it, which sort of undercuts those arguments. Now, it does seem that there were several writers in the early 20th century who started to talk about similar sounding ideas, and many of the post-war creative writing programs sponsored by anti-communist organizations did actually teach people to focus on sensory and human experiences in their writing in opposition to what they perceived as dogmatic and doctrinal communist literature. I don't really understand how it's colonialism though. I mean, that's a serious accusation, and as far as I can tell, the most direct argument for how it is colonialism is in this essay by Cecilia Tan, where she literally argues that colonialism is when you have a naive protagonist. That's literally the entire argument. Maybe I just don't understand colonialism, but I could have sworn there was more to it than that. In any case, no matter where it came from, to this day, Show Don't Tell is handed out as advice by MFA programs, random YouTubers, and everywhere in between. But I think if you read between the lines, you can see that the advice makes obvious sense if it's applied in the way I think it was originally meant, which is to help writers, particularly beginner writers, focus on the craft and artistry of their work. Let's compare two sentences. As he walked into the store, the homeless woman outside made him nervous. And, as he walked into the store, he averted his eyes from the homeless woman outside. Instead of stating that he was nervous, describing the action of how he was nervous has many advantages. It shows us the exact nervous reaction he has, which gives us some extra texture and specificity. You can be nervous in lots of different ways, and you can react to your nervousness in lots of different ways. Some people might stiffen and stare. Some people might pretend that they don't see her, and some people might look away. That last one conveys a sort of nervousness about her existence, as opposed to being worried that she might hurt him or something. Maybe it's nervousness about the existence of her and people like her. Maybe it also makes him feel shame. I keep saying maybe. Is it bad that it isn't clear? No. The lack of explicit clarity is actually an advantage. Each reader can add to it with their own experience. Maybe the reader has an opinion about people who look away from homeless people. Or maybe it's something they do themselves. The writer could try saying, as he walked into the store, the homeless woman outside filled him with shameful nervousness. But why? How? It's too specific, and weirdly also not specific enough. It calls so much blatant attention to their emotional state, the reader will expect an explanation. And then suddenly you are explaining the backstory of a character's emotion, and, like explaining a joke kills the humor, explaining an emotion kills the drama. Lastly, action is more compelling than description. This is just obvious. Would it be more exciting to ride a roller coaster or hear about someone else's ride? Of course, this doesn't mean you never listen to someone else's experience, and it doesn't mean that you never use exposition in writing. Obviously, reading about something is also less exciting than doing it, but reading about it can be more or less exciting depending on how it's told. It's not a hard and fast rule, it's just a suggestion when given a choice. And this is the aspect of it that efficiency doesn't really cover. This is the other problem with Rey's cave scene. Having her tell us when they already showed us isn't just inefficient, it's also boring and sucks the drama out of the visuals. But if you were confused instead of gripped, then her explanation is helpful, which is probably why it's here. I'm guessing test audiences were confused. However, an explanation is not an excuse, and it's still inefficient and inartistic. There are better ways of doing this. For example, after Luke's cave scene, they have Yoda mention in passing Luke's failure in the cave, which probably helped clear that up for people who were confused without undercutting the scene itself. Now, I tacitly made fun of the people who suggest that Show Don't Tell is propaganda or colonialism because, well, it's a little ridiculous. It clearly has merit as artistic advice. On the other hand, there is something to what they are saying. It's quite possible to interpret this not as advice about specific moments of writing and storytelling, but instead as advice for the whole story. Avoid exposition, rely on illusion, don't spell anything out. You can see how that would make it more difficult to tell cross-cultural stories if we're always looking for our stories to make allusions to our culture and use our cultural understanding when they show things. But this is a failure of applying the advice, not of the advice itself. Because when you apply it to anything other than small moments, it starts to fall apart. And that's what I mean when I say the original advice is confused with an aesthetic preference for minimalism and reducing the amount of exposition. A good example of this is actually in Cecilia Tan's essay about how Show Don't Tell is colonialism. She writes, "Here's a question that I once asked as a joke at a writers' conference and unintentionally ignited a near-religious schism. Is the Council of Elrond telling or showing?" The problem here is the broad application. It's a huge chapter with lots of exposition, but characters react to the exposition, which shows us things about them. There's also debate, and much of the exposition is exposition about action, like Gandalf telling the story of how he got locked up by Saruman. So, what is she talking about specifically? I know it's a joke, but it's a joke to illustrate that the advice is bad. But it's not bad, she's just using the advice too broadly. But in her defense, I think that kind of broadness is normal. That's why people treat it like an aesthetic preference so often. It's why she ignited such a huge conflict with the joke. But with that kind of broad application being the norm, I think it is okay to more or less abandon this phrase, no matter what it really means. So it should come as no surprise that I agree absolutely with what Ms. Tan says next. I'm less concerned with what we label it, and more concerned with whether there was a more effective way to convey the information to the reader. In other words, she's looking for efficiency. Before we finish, I want to make something clear. I do not think this is the most important part of a story. It's certainly not the part that matters to me the most, and I'm a little worried that because I've given it so much attention, it can seem that way. Hopefully this helped clarify and we can never talk about Show Don't Tell again. Because there's so much more that goes into making a good story. Efficiency is important, but it isn't the most important or even the most interesting part of a story. Style, themes, and meaning are all things that I care about more. But above all, the most important thing for me in a story is heart. It's care. It's the feeling that someone poured their soul into making it. Now, that's not the only important part. If you told the most heartfelt story in the world horribly and efficiently and without any style, that wouldn't be a good story. But I can get past mistakes if there's real heart and soul in it. I played a lot of classical music when I was younger, and the thing that really makes listening to a piece enjoyable is how much emotion and heart it has, not how technically correct it is. This rendition of Slave Knight Gael by the YouTuber Uprising Grand is not mechanically perfect. But I love it because it's a great arrangement and he plays it with such heart, power, and feeling. And that's what's most important.